I never thought a single moment could shatter everything you believed about your father, about family, about what it means to be a man. But sitting here today, 12 years later, I can still feel the cold October wind cutting through my jacket as my dad's truck disappeared into the darkness, leaving me stranded 40 miles from home in the middle of nowhere. That night changed everything. It was supposed to make me tougher, he said, but what it really did was show me who I truly was underneath all his expectations. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Hit that like button if you have ever felt misunderstood by someone you love. And do not forget to subscribe because stories like these remind us that our greatest struggles often lead to our most powerful discoveries. Now, let me take you back to that terrifying night that would define the rest of my life. Growing up in a small Montana town where everyone knew everyone I was, James Sullivan, the kid who never quite fit his father's idea of what a son should be. My dad, Derek, was a construction foreman with hands like leather and a voice that could command a crew of 20 men without breaking a sweat. He built houses that stood for decades, fixed engines with nothing but intuition, and expected his only son to follow in his steel-toed footsteps. My mother, Sarah, died when I was 12 complications during what should have been my little sister's birth. We lost them both that winter night, and something in Derek died with them. He never said it directly, but I could see it in his eyes every time he looked at me. I was a reminder of what he had lost, and maybe worse. I was nothing like what he had hoped his son would become. Derek believed in tough love, the way other people believed in religion. When I was 13 and came home crying because Tommy Peterson had given me a black eye, Derek handed me his work gloves and said, "Tomorrow you march right back there and return the favor. Sullivans do not run from fights." When I tried to explain that Tommy was twice my size and I had only been trying to stop him from picking on smaller kids, Derek just shook his head like I had spoken a foreign language. But I kept trying to make him proud. I played football for 3 miserable seasons, my 140-pound frame getting crushed by farm boys who had been throwing hay bales since they were 10. I learned to use power tools even though the noise made my teeth ache. I helped him renovate our neighbor's kitchen, spending entire weekends holding boards steady while he measured and cut with mechanical precision. The problem was, I was good at other things, really good. When Mrs. Henderson started the after-school art program, I discovered I could draw faces that looked like photographs. When our music teacher, Mr. Davidson, heard me humming during study hall, he convinced me to try out for chorus. I made varsity choir as a sophomore, which should have been an honor, but Derek acted like I had announced I was joining a knitting circle. The breaking point came during my junior year when I won the regional art competition with a charcoal portrait of an old rancher. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature story, and I was so excited to show Derek the trophy and the $50 prize that I practically sprinted home from school. I found him in the garage, working under the hood of his Chevy, and thrust the newspaper clipping toward him with shaking hands. He wiped his greasy fingers on his jeans before taking the paper, studying it with the same expression he used when examining a faulty carburetor. After what felt like an eternity, he handed it back to me and said, "Well, I suppose every town needs someone to draw pretty pictures." Then he turned back to his engine like I had never been there at all. Coach Martinez was the only adult who understood what I was going through. He taught biology during the day and coached track in the afternoons, but he also ran a small art club for kids who needed somewhere to belong. "Your father loves you, James," he told me one afternoon as I worked on a landscape painting. "He just does not know how to love the person you actually are instead of the person he thinks you should be." That spring, Derek announced we were going on a camping trip. "Just the two of us," he said, "like we used to do when your mother was alive." I could not remember us ever camping together, but I was so hungry for his approval that I would have agreed to anything. "This trip is going to straighten some things out between us," he continued. "Time to separate the men from the boys." The morning we were supposed to leave, Derek threw a small backpack in the bed of his pickup and told me to get in. I had packed my own gear the night before, sleeping bag, extra clothes matches, even a sketchbook in case we saw something beautiful I wanted to capture. But when I looked in the truck bed, I only saw his single bag and a cooler that smelled like beer. "Where is the tent?" I asked, climbing into the passenger seat. "We will figure it out when we get there," Derek replied, starting the engine with more force than necessary. As we drove through town and out onto the highway, I noticed Derek taking swigs from a can wrapped in a brown paper bag. The radio played country songs about heartbreak and hard living, and Derek sang along under his breath, his voice getting rougher with each mile. We were heading west toward the national forest, but on roads I had never seen before. "Dad, are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, after we had been driving for over an hour through increasingly dense wilderness. "I know exactly where we are going," he said, not looking at me. "Been planning this for months." Something cold settled in my stomach. The way he said planning sounded wrong, like he was talking about something other than camping. I tried to make conversation, asking about the trees we were passing, the mountains in the distance, anything to fill the growing silence between us. But Derek only responded with grunts or single word answers, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. As the sun started to set, Derek pulled off onto what could barely be called a road. It was really just tire tracks through the forest, bumpy and narrow, with branches scraping against the windows. "This is perfect," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Perfect for what I asked, but he did not answer. When Derek finally stopped the truck, we were in a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. I could not see any signs of civilization, not even power lines or the distant glow of town lights. The silence was complete, except for the ticking of the cooling engine and the soft whisper of wind through the branches. "Get out," Derek said. I hesitated. "Should not we set up camp first?" "It is getting dark." I said, "Get out." His voice had changed, become something I had never heard before. Not angry exactly, but cold and final. I opened the door and stepped into the clearing, the October air immediately cutting through my jacket. Derek walked around to my side of the truck, and I could smell the beer on his breath mixed with something else, something desperate and mean. "You want to know what your problem is, James," he said, standing too close to me. "You are exactly like her. Soft, weak, always looking for the easy way out. Like who?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Your mother. She filled your head with all this artsy nonsense, made you think the world owes you something just for being sensitive." Derek's voice was rising now, years of buried resentment finally breaking free. "Well, let me tell you something about the real world, son. Nobody cares about your feelings. Nobody wants to see your pretty pictures. And nobody is going to take care of you just because you cry when things get tough." I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. "Dad, what are you talking about? I have never asked anyone to take care of me. I work hard at everything I do." "You call that working hard?" Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Singing in some choir, drawing pictures. That is not work, James. That is playing pretend. And I am tired of pretending right along with you." He grabbed the small backpack from the truck bed and threw it at my feet. It barely weighed anything, certainly not enough supplies for a camping trip. "Here is what is going to happen," Derek continued. "You are going to walk out of these woods the same way we drove in. When you make it back to town, if you make it back to town, maybe you will understand what it actually means to be a man. Maybe you will finally appreciate everything I have tried to teach you." The words hit me like physical blows. "You cannot be serious. Dad, it is 40 miles back to town. I do not even know which direction to go. Figure it out." Derek was already walking back to the driver's side of the truck. "Your mother thought she could protect you from the world by making you soft. Well, she is not here anymore, and I am done cleaning up her mistakes." "My mother loved me," I said, my voice cracking, "and she did not make any mistakes." Derek paused with his hand on the door handle. "Your mother died because of you, James. Because you were too weak to be born properly. Because you took too much out of her. And every day since then you have been proving that her death was for nothing." Those words cut deeper than anything he had ever said to me, deeper than I thought words could cut. But somehow, standing there in that clearing with darkness closing in around me, I found my voice. "If that is what you really believe," I said, "then you are the one who never grew up to be a man." Derek's face twisted with rage. "Time to man up for real," he sneered, climbing into the truck. "Find your own way home, or do not bother coming back." The engine roared to life, headlights sweeping across the trees as Derek turned around in the clearing. I stood there watching the red taillights disappear through the forest, listening to the sound of the engine fading until there was nothing left but silence and the whisper of wind through the pines. I was completely alone, 40 miles from home, with nothing but a backpack that probably contained a granola bar and a bottle of water. And for the first time in my life, I realized that maybe that was exactly what I needed to be. The first hour after Derek left, I kept expecting to hear the truck coming back. I convinced myself this was just another one of his tests that he would return once he thought I had learned my lesson. I sat on a fallen log in the clearing, straining to hear the sound of an engine jumping at every crack of a branch or rustle in the underbrush. But as full darkness settled over the forest and the temperature began to drop, reality set in with the weight of a avalanche. Derek was not coming back. He had planned this, prepared for it, and left me here to sink or swim on my own. I opened the backpack with shaking hands and found exactly what I had feared: a single bottle of water, 2 energy bars, and a cheap flashlight with batteries that were probably older than I was. No sleeping bag, no matches, no map. Derek had given me just enough to survive one night if I was lucky. The panic hit me then like a physical force. My chest tightened, my breathing became shallow, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. I was 16 years old, 40 miles from the nearest town, in a forest I had never seen before, with no way to call for help and no idea which direction to walk. But then, as I sat there hyperventilating in the dark, something unexpected happened. I started to notice things. The way the moonlight filtered through the branches, creating patterns of silver and shadow on the forest floor. The sound of an owl calling from somewhere deep in the trees. The smell of pine needles and damp earth, and the clean, cold air of the mountains. I pulled out my sketchbook and pencil, working by the weak beam of the flashlight. I drew what I could see of the clearing, trying to capture the shapes of the trees, the angle of the rocks, anything that might help me remember this place or find my way back to it. As I drew, my breathing slowed, my hands steadied, and my mind began to work again. Derek had always told me that my art was useless, but now it was the only tool I had for survival. I could use it to map my route, to remember landmarks, to keep track of where I had been. The skills Mrs. Henderson had taught me about observation and detail suddenly became the difference between life and death. I spent that first night huddled against a large pine tree, using pine boughs as insulation and my jacket as a blanket. I dozed fitfully, waking every time I heard a sound in the darkness. But I made it through to dawn. When the sun finally rose, painting the forest in shades of gold and green, I felt something I had never felt before: pride in my own strength. The next 3 days became a test of everything I had ever learned, not from Derek, but from the world around me. I remembered lessons from Boy Scouts about finding water by following animal trails downhill. I used my artistic eye to spot edible plants like huckleberries and pine nuts. I built shelter using techniques I had seen in books, weaving branches together and insulating with moss and leaves. Most importantly, I navigated using landmarks I sketched in my notebook. A distinctive rock formation shaped like a sleeping giant, a creek that curved around a stand of aspen trees, a ridge where I could see for miles in every direction. Each drawing became part of my map home, and each mile I walked became proof that Derek had been wrong about everything. On the third day, weak from hunger but stronger in spirit than I had ever been, I finally saw the lights of town twinkling in the valley below. Instead of heading straight home, I walked to the nearest payphone and called my Uncle Pete, Derek's younger brother, who had always been the black sheep of the family because he taught high school English instead of working with his hands. James Pete's voice cracked when he heard me. "Where are you?" Derek came by 2 days ago saying you had run away on some camping trip. "I am at the truck stop on Highway 12. I said, too tired to explain everything over the phone. "Can you come get me?" Pete arrived 20 minutes later, taking one look at my torn clothes and scratched face before pulling me into a hug that smelled like coffee and old books. "What happened out there?" he asked as we drove toward town. I told him everything. About Derek's drinking, about the cruel things he had said about my mother, about being abandoned in the forest with nothing but a backpack, and his sneering words about manning up. Pete listened without interrupting, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw getting tighter with every detail. When we pulled into our driveway, Derek's truck was parked there like nothing had happened. He came out onto the porch and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out what story I had told and how he could spin it in his favor. "There is my boy," Derek called out, all false joviality. "I was starting to worry about you. How was your little adventure?" But something had changed in me during those 3 days in the forest. I walked up to him, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "It was exactly what I needed. I learned that I am stronger than you ever gave me credit for, and I learned that real strength has nothing to do with abandoning people who love you." Derek's smile faltered. "Now hold on, son. That was not abandonment. That was character building. I was teaching you to be self-reliant. You were teaching me that the person who was supposed to protect me would rather hurt me than admit he was wrong, I replied. But you know what, I survived anyway. Not because of anything you taught me, but because of everything you said was worthless. My art, my sensitivity, my ability to see beauty even when I am scared. Those were the things that saved me. Uncle Pete stepped up beside me. Derek, we need to talk. What you did was not parenting. It was child endangerment, and if James wants to press charges, I will support him. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in Derek's eyes. Not fear of the consequences, but fear that he was losing control of the narrative he had built about what it meant to be strong. I was making him tough, Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction now. No, I said, you were making yourself feel better about being weak. Real men do not abandon their children in the woods. Real men do not blame their dead wives for their own failures. And real men do not have to tear other people down to feel strong themselves. Derek stared at me for a long moment, and I thought maybe finally he might understand what he had done. Instead, he turned and walked back into the house, closing the door behind him like a final punctuation mark on our relationship. That night, I packed my belongings and moved in with Uncle Pete. Derek never apologized, never acknowledged that what he had done was wrong, and never seemed to understand that his attempt to break me had actually revealed exactly who I was meant to be. The legal consequences came later. Uncle Pete convinced me to report what had happened, and Derek faced charges for child endangerment and abandonment. He spent 6 months in county jail and 2 years on probation, but more importantly, he lost the right to call himself my father in any way that mattered. Living with Uncle Pete changed everything. Where Derek had seen weakness in my love of art and literature, Pete saw strength and potential. He helped me apply for art scholarships, drove me to portfolio reviews at colleges, and never once suggested that creativity was anything less than essential to the human experience. I spent the rest of high school healing from those years of trying to be someone I was not. I joined the school newspaper, took advanced art classes, and even performed a solo in the spring choir concert. Each small act of authenticity felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Derek had tried to steal. But the most important change was how I understood strength itself. Those 3 days in the forest had taught me that real toughness was not about suppressing emotion or dominating others. It was about adapting to challenges, finding resources within yourself that you never knew existed, and refusing to let other people define your worth. After graduation, I studied forestry and wildlife management in college, combining my love of nature with practical skills that would serve me for life. I became a wilderness guide, leading hiking and camping trips for people who wanted to reconnect with the outdoors. The irony was not lost on me that Derek's attempt to break me in the wilderness had actually given me my life's calling. Years later, I started a program for troubled teenagers, kids who had been told they were not tough enough, or good enough, or man enough by the adults in their lives. I taught them survival skills, but more importantly, I taught them that surviving difficult people was just as much of an accomplishment as surviving in the wilderness. Some of those kids reminded me of myself at 16, sensitive, artistic, struggling to find their place in a world that seemed to value only certain kinds of strength. Others were angry and defensive, lashing out at everyone around them because someone had convinced them that aggression was the same thing as power. But all of them needed to learn the same lesson I had learned in those dark woods, that your greatest strengths are often the things other people try to convince you are weaknesses. I think about Derek, sometimes wonder if he ever understood what he threw away that night when he drove off and left me standing in that clearing. He lost his son not because I was weak, but because he could not love the person I actually was. He chose his own rigid ideas about masculinity over his own child, and in doing so, he proved that he never understood what it meant to be strong at all. The last I heard, Derek was still living in the same house, still working construction, when his health allowed it, still telling anyone who would listen that his son had been ungrateful and soft. He never remarried, never had other children, and as far as I know, never admitted that maybe there were different ways to be a good man in this world, but I do not carry anger toward him anymore. That 3-day journey through the forest taught me that carrying resentment is just another kind of burden that slows you down when you need to keep moving forward. Derek gave me an unintentional gift when he abandoned me in those woods. He forced me to discover that I was already everything I needed to be. Today, when I take groups of teenagers on wilderness expeditions, I tell them Derek's version of the story, and then I tell them mine. His version goes something like this. A father tried to teach his weak son to be strong by leaving him alone to figure things out. My version is different. A young man discovered that the qualities other people had mocked him for were actually the keys to his survival and success. Both versions end the same way, with a 16-year-old boy finding his way out of the woods. But only one of them understands that he was never lost in the first place. He was just becoming who he was always meant to be. And sometimes the people who love us most are the least equipped to see who that person really is. Real strength, I learned, is not about never feeling afraid or vulnerable. It is about feeling those things and continuing to move forward anyway. It is about using whatever tools you have, whether they are traditional or not, to solve the problems in front of you. And sometimes it is about recognizing that the person who is supposed to teach you how to be strong might have the most to learn about strength themselves. I often wonder what would have happened if Derek had been able to see my art as a different kind of strength, if he could have understood that sensitivity and toughness are not opposites, but partners in the dance of being fully human. But wondering about that is like wishing the forest had been less dark, or the journey home had been shorter. The difficulty was the point. The challenge was what made the victory meaningful. What do you think makes someone truly strong? Is it the ability to endure hardship alone, or the wisdom to know when to ask for help? Have you ever discovered that something you thought was a weakness was actually your greatest strength? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if it reminded you that sometimes our most difficult moments teach us the most important lessons. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds and finding strength in unexpected places, and please share this with anyone who might need to hear that they are already strong enough, exactly as they are. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the wilderness is not something to be conquered, but something to teach us who we really are when everything else is stripped away. Until next time, keep finding your own path home.